Funny thing is, a lot of people think there isn't such a thing as perfection, and to a certain degree I do agree with them, and I did completely agree with them until I read my first seinen manga, Vagabond. Bro, I kid you not, when I laid my eyes upon Vagabond, something just hit me. I lost my breath with the beauty of how everything was done. I just recently come off watching a bunch of shonen anime like Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Attack on Titan, the good old classics. But man, could you imagine coming off Attack on Titan and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood just to witness Vagabond? That's nothing to throw against those other series, but like if you've read Vagabond, you're gonna kinda understand what I'm talking about. I'm sure some Donovan looking motherfuckers gonna comment down below something about actually Vagabond isn't perfect because on chapter 69. But unfortunately for them, they're just not gonna get the point of this video. It's not to say that Vagabond is perfect in every aspect. Yes, it is kind of saying that because that's literally what the title is saying. But the point of this video is to express the fact that first of all, Vagabond is a masterpiece. Certain stories set out to do certain things. Berserk sets out to set a dark fantasy narrative with a struggling protagonist who endures some of the craziest shit you're ever going to see, and a contrasting antagonist who sacrifices his soul to become great and achieve his goals. That's what Berserk's trying to do. There's a lot more to Berserk, but what Vagabond tries to do is establish the character of Musashi and really show us his perspective through his journey and really see the different lessons he learned, especially to do with the meaning of strength. And then when it comes to that lesson and those different themes, I don't really see a series other than Berserk that does what it sets out to do perfectly. Because of that, I consider Vagabond to be perfect, and that's exactly why I call Vagabond the perfect manga. If a perfect manga could exist, I'm not gonna lie to you, it'd probably be Berserk. It would be Vagabond. Vagabond is kind of like if you combine the feudal Japan events with Stoicism and Buddhism and just created a philosophical, breathtaking, incredibly drawn masterpiece of fiction. That's the best way I can describe it. That's a mouthful to say, but it truly is. The philosophical beliefs in Vagabond and how they tie into the characters and the way they contrast the characters. I could go on for days about how good this manga is in terms of its philosophy because that shit is absolutely brilliant and you're going to learn so many things from just reading it. The consistent juxtaposition of Musashi and Madahachi, the two very forefronts of the story, exemplify the vast differentiation between pursuing meaning and having a dream, which is portrayed through Musashi as his character is primarily through pursuing a certain thing, at least for the first, I guess, 3/4 of the story, maybe 2/3 of the story. And then on the other side, you have a man who pursues expediency because of his own weakness, and that is Madahachi. A lot of people don't like Madahachi because he's really just a pathetic ass human being. He kind of doesn't accomplish anything except towards the end of the story. And his character is all about learning about his own weakness, accepting his own weakness, and striving to become stronger in that regard. And then you have a character like Musashi who is the forefront of the entire story. Everything pretty much revolves around him. He's the main character, and the story is really told through his perspective. He's already seen as strong because he's much stronger than the other swordsmen, especially towards the later half of the story, but he's definitely much stronger in a sense to the person who's reading, whereas the person might attach himself more to Madahachi in terms of his habits. He can't really attach himself more to Musashi.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Despite that fact, you still feel an incredible connection with Musashi because you realize that just being this great person, being this chatty personality, doesn't mean you're necessarily strong, because Musashi, while he may be really cool and while he may be cutting down everyone in his path like it's absolutely nothing, he still struggles with a lot of things, and we don't quite realize that at the beginning. But that's the entire purpose of the story: self-improvement and self-growth. Whoever you are as a person, there's much more to grow from, and Musashi learns this throughout his journey, and Madahachi learns it in a completely different way. Hence the juxtaposition of these two characters. Constantly it's between these two characters, except to a certain point where we get introduced to Kojiro. We'll talk about that later. Madahachi represents man as they naturally are: weak, lustful, lazy, and pathetic. That's the best way to summarize Madahachi. Musashi, on the other hand, is a venerable vagabond, literally, who pursues meaning, which makes him a much more appealing character compared to Madahachi, as I touched on before. But again, it's crazy because it's almost as if Musashi learns more and improves better as a person despite already being a much better person than Madahachi throughout his journey. Some people hate on Madahachi's weakness, but the only way they're going to understand the brilliance of his character comes when they understand his similarity with themselves. Musashi Musashi, despite being one of the most revered swordsmen in all of Japan, is weak based on his personality, because as he starts out, he's a lot like that edgelord character, very similar to characters like Guts and Thorfinn, who just start off as rageful monsters and just go after people like they're nothing but killing machines. Musashi's mindless pursuit strayed him away from his own weakness. It diverted his attention from his internal weakness and his weakness of personality and of self, and instead brought all of his attention onto becoming invincible under the sun, only to later realize that there was no such thing as becoming invincible and that he was just weak the entire time. And best of all, both of these characters have perfect I'm gonna be careful here, conclusions to their pursuit of strength. Inoue, in my opinion, is one of the greatest authors, at least one of the greatest mangaka out there, and one of the reasons for that is that the way he does this manga, Vagabond in my opinion is his best work. I've only read Real, I haven't read Slam Dunk yet, but I'm pretty sure Vagabond is his best work. The way he does this manga is just, he carries you through Musashi's experiences and contrasts them with different perspectives just to show you the effects of pursuing the sword and the different effects of pursuing the sword that come with the different characters. There's some characters that do only for fame and glory, which represents Madahachi. There's some characters who are completely driven by one goal, which is like Musashi, who's the main character. And then there's another character, Sasuke Kojiro, who kind of represents pursuing the sword just because he likes the damn thing, right? Kojiro loves to wield the sword, and that's kind of what we're being shown with Kojiro's character, a person who wields the sword simply for enjoyment. Now, being a samurai manga means you're going to need to have a lot of good fights, and you're going to need to do your fights perfectly to the T. Vagabond does just that, and then some. Vagabond, in terms of fights, is unmatched, period. There aren't any ridiculous 9-sword style, demon monkey, Buddha reincarnate form, death slash attacks. It's just fighting. One person versus another, one man versus the other, and in some cases one man versus seven. But what Vagabond tends to focus on with its fights compared to its rival stories is the flow of the mind, how the mind flows through the fight, how the emotions affect the characters, and how things like fear, sadness, and despair can affect you in a fight and cause you to lose your life. How the experience of fighting so many different people along the way through your journey has shown you your own weakness and has shown you the different perspectives of different people and why different people really wield the sword. I can't explain Vagabond's fights too much without going into spoilers, which is why I really just recommend you read the fights. You know what I'm saying? Even though I'm sure a lot of you have seen Vagabond because it's one of the most popular seinen manga ever. And despite that, it still doesn't have an anime and it still doesn't have an ending. To give you a relatively spoiler-free example of a fight, let's take the Inshun fight, which is a pretty early on fight in the story where the main theme was fear. There are other examples, of course, and I don't want to spoil the best fights in the story. As I said, holy, the fights get crazy. Now, I've talked plenty about Musashi, as if to say Vagabond doesn't have another exceptional character in Sasuke Kojiro, the deaf-mute swordsman known to be like water. About half the entire story is from Kojiro's own perspective, and he has this gigantic backstory, making him sort of like this other main character. Now, the thing that's so appealing about Kojiro, in my opinion, is his subtle dynamic with Musashi and the difference between the way he and Musashi approach the sword. Kojiro doesn't seem a lot like the other swordsmen. He isn't drunk on fighting and gaining status. He kind of just wields the thing because he loves it. And I mentioned this before. And he wields the sword because the sword was kind of the thing that comforted him when he was a child, and it was kind of what he grew up with as a child. And so he later ends up pursuing the sword, and there's a gigantic backstory, which, my god, bro, Kojiro's backstory is absolutely breathtaking. And I know I use that word a lot in this video, but it's probably the best way to summarize Vagabond. His backstory was just incredible reading, and just the artwork was amazing. The artwork's another thing with Vagabond. Besides maybe Berserk, One Punch Man, a couple other things you might like a lot more in terms of artwork, Vagabond has like some of the best, most realistic artwork there is. Inoue uses a brush to draw. A brush, bro. Everything about Vagabond is pretty much perfect, and I don't really care what you say. Well, I suppose the one gripe you could have about it is the fact that it's probably never going to end, which, just saying that, even though I've already accepted it, it still kind of hurts, man. Like, probably isn't gonna get an ending. But hey, we said something about Berserk, it's not gonna get an ending, and Berserk, it's continuing right now, so you never know, Vagabond could come back. Imagine having Vagabond and Berserk ongoing. This manga is the closest thing I've seen to perfect when it comes to manga, besides maybe Berserk.